Thank you, John. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and particularly to be part of this panel on a very important, exciting and timely theme, the extraordinary explosion of cultural and creative energy in Africa, and to be doing so with three creative dynamos from very different parts of the continent. From South Africa, the entrepreneur Ravi Naidoo; from Senegal, the artist and fashion designer Seli Habe Khan; and from Kenya, the musician, DJ and producer Blinky Bill. And you've all been able to sample Blinky's work already. Now, there is absolutely no doubt that Africa is currently producing some of the most innovative and compelling work in the creative and cultural fields. But it would be foolish to ignore the fact that it's a deeply complex and in parts still very vulnerable and precarious continent, where many parts of Africa still suffer extreme economic, social, political, and ecological instability, and people are living very precarious lives. Though there's a very different side to the continent of the extraordinary cultural and creative work that's coming out of it and is being recognized internationally. So in Europe alone, we've had an amazing series of African projects this spring and summer, from the beautiful pots made by the Kenyan ceramicist Magdalena Dundo, which have been exhibited at the Hepworth Wakefield in Yorkshire, the first ever Ghana Pavilion, which has been a huge hit at the Venice Art Biennale, a wonderful exhibition of the work of the great Ghanaian sculptor Ella Natsui at Haus der Kunst in Munich, and opening very recently a huge exhibition at Palais de Tokyo in Paris on the culture of different cities, including Lagos and Dakar. Now, equally engaging is the work of the incredible African writers, designers, architects, musicians, fashion designers, and dancers. Extraordinary work in every field, and central to this has been the annual creative festival in Cape Town, Design Indaba, which has brought international designers and other creatives to South Africa and has also showcased and championed the work of great African artists like Blinky and Seli. So, in their wisdom, the organisers of the Aspen Ideas Festival invited the founder of Design Indaba, Ravi Naidoo, to come here and to bring some of his friends with him. So, Ravi, come and join me on stage. Ravi... Ravi is the founder and managing director of Interactive Africa, a creative production company that promotes South Africa in particular and Africa in general. He founded it in 1994 after completing an MBA at Cape Town University and working in advertising for 3 years for the agency Young and Rubicon. Among his first projects were the first African in Space mission, and helping to pitch South Africa's successful bid to stage the 2010 World Cup soccer tournament, and of course Design Indaba. Now, I had the pleasure of going to Design Indaba for the first time a couple of months ago, and it was fantastic. As well as hearing extraordinary speakers, I was so moved and so excited just by the spirit of all, particularly the young African creatives in the audience, the optimism, the confidence, the ambition and the energy, and the curiosity to hear new ideas and fresh thinking. So Ravi, let's begin at the beginning and sit down and talk about how Design Indaba came about and also its relationship to your previous projects like the Space Mission and the World Cup bid.
Okay, I grew up in a very interesting time in South Africa's history. It was 1990. I was an academic. I was doing postgraduate research at the University of Cape Town in some rather esoteric medical research. And about the time Nelson Mandela was released from prison, it was like all bets were on. And as the country was going through its reinvention, I thought I could reinvent myself as well. And made a detour, and the instant segue was me to get into an ad agency, which is quite a bizarre thing from medicine, but I worked on a pharmaceutical account and did it for about 2 years and decided that it was rather formulaic and repetitive. Sorry, Brian. At the time, I thought, well, perhaps the thing I really wanted to do was to try and create a skunk works that would help to give support.
Hang on, a skunk work?
A skunk works,
With a
yeah.
K?
Yeah,
Two Ks.
S-K-U-N-K. So something that would help to dramatize the vision. I mean, we had this talismanic leader. It was also exciting. We were all sipping the Kool-Aid. It was heady times in the country. Everything was possible. And so we set up this platform called Interactive Africa. And the whole idea was not to help some brand manager sell more cough syrup this quarter, but perhaps to help in things that would really have socioeconomic impact. So we did some crazy projects. The one project was we went from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip of Africa in a convoy, and it was a rally across Africa. But it brought global attention to the fact that there were more phones in Manhattan in 1999 than all of Africa.
No longer the case, of course.
No longer the case. And we were trying to say that Africa missed the Industrial Revolution. It daren't miss the digital revolution. So we call this the African Connection Rally. And together with a Canadian NGO called IDRC, we built telecenters along the way and gave telephony to people who hadn't heard a dialing tone before. But the big part of it was this communications campaign to say to people on the ground, demand more is your basic human right, saying to governments, create the policy framework for investment in telecommunications. And then asking international companies not to be skittish about Africa. It's a greenfields opportunity and come and invest here. And so this kind of set the tone for these kind of self-initiated projects, hardly ever funded by government. We traipsed around corporate boardrooms and were able to raise the money for this. And together with this, created a project like bidding for the Soccer World Cup. And the most zany one was in 2001, project managing a trip to space for the first African in space, which we did with the Russians, and a South African went up to the International Space Station. And on the back of that, we created a platform called HIP to be square, written as a formula, HIP 2B superscript 2. And this was really to promote maths and science with the youth. You see, during apartheid education, they had systematically removed maths and science from the curricula of black children. And one of the things we wanted to do with this project was to really make it sexy to go and study maths and science. So this is the background. And about the same time, we created this platform called Design Indaba. And I can tell you quickly about that.
Go ahead.
But parched. So the problem about Africa all too often is that most of our economy is an extraction economy. And the mindset in South Africa, clearly at the dawn of our democracy, was that the value was in the earth. And so much about the South African economy related to mining. And we were wanting to suggest in 1994, at the dawn of democracy, a new narrative. And we're saying that perhaps in the 21st century, we're going to be mining ideas and less of this 19th century idea of mining of gold and diamonds and platinum. And so we created this platform called Design Indaba. And we kind of suggested that in the 21st century, the alchemy of converting ideas to reality was what's going to be the real X factor in the transformation of the economy. And in order to do that, we want to corral the best people from around the world. So we got you, we've had Brian, we've had a whole host of fantastic people to come and inspire the next generation of Africans in order to be able to give them creative courage to go out there and express themselves and tell their own stories. And we created it in a kind of way that was really at once a think tank and a do tank. So we say 3 days of talking and 362 days of doing. So each time we have an event, it becomes a mandate for action.
So can you talk about some of the doing projects
Sure.
that were initiated?
And some of which is going off here as wallpaper in the background. Perhaps the one that got us some global acclaim initially was we built terraces of houses in a squatter camp in Cape Town. And we thought that the offering from government to the poorest of the poor just lacked empathy and dignity, and they could be a lot more creative. And so you will know this, Alice, and most of you have ever been to Design Indaba. You perhaps don't look forward to that call when I call you sometime in trying to regale you about a new possible project and try to get you back to Cape Town to help us in leveraging a new project. So we managed to corral people like Sir David Ajay, Thomas Heatherwick, Cameron Sinclair, Shigeru Ban, a galaxy of international stars. We paired them with African architects so there could be wonderful intellectual transfer and people who had immense local knowledge. And we built these houses, so it wasn't some kind of ivory tower academic project. Real families who had lived in shacks moved into them. And so Design Indaba becomes this interesting place where we just don't talk, we do. And it really has against the backdrop of all of these other projects, these kind of serious activist kind of orientation.
And can you talk about how it's evolved over the years? Because it's, 24 years old now, 25th anniversary next year. It's an amazingly long time.
It is a long time, and it's a long time keeping on. But I think the best thing is what's happened in terms of the entire platform.
Actually, very quickly, can you all hear Ravi?
Can you hear me clearly?
The microphone's come back, I think. It wandered off.
Should I project a lot more deeply? Can you hear me clearly? Yeah.
No, I think it's the
cool.
tech that went.
And essentially, the project has grown. It's been a wonderful showcase for the best of African talent. It's triggered gorgeous collaborations, like the most recent one with IKEA, with 10 designers from all across Africa, creating the first African design collection available at every store globally through IKEA, with a lot of the production happening in South Africa as well. And I think what we're starting to do is get a bit more ambitious in terms of our projects. And the one thing is we've got a current project where we're trying to do a intervention in every single country in Africa, which is a crazy idea.
No, but a brilliant one.
But 54 countries in Africa. We just inaugurated one with a wonderful architect called Miriam Kamara, which we're doing in Niger, which was announced at Design Indaba this year, a new artisanal valley, which was separating the rich and the poor in Niger, the old French colonial quarter, and the black area. And we wanted to create a wonderful porous place in between for some social intercourse. So we're doing that with her, with Ez Devlin, the famous stage designer, who did the project with us in Cape Town. We're creating a new school in Malawi. With Thomas Heatherwick and some local architects, we're doing a new coffee museum in Addis Ababa. So the scale and the ambition has really grown a fair bit since we started in 1995.
So a quick final question is, how are you going to celebrate the 25th anniversary and what's coming up in the future?
By inviting all of you to join me next year. That'll be gorgeous.
You'll probably end up going as well.
It's a spectacular 3 days. I mean, the way we do Design Indaba is quite atypical from the way design conferences happen. It's a bit of a Cirque du Soleil for the intellect. It's super performative and rather theatrical. A talk could morph into a concert with a philharmonic orchestra. Another talk could become a play with 2 sets and professional actors. So it's really quite an immersive experience. And we're planning a blockbuster for the 25th anniversary. And we'll be announcing a whole raft of new projects. It's the projects that really keep us going. You know, all too often when you do events, you've got a circus of people who come together for the gig and for that duration. We keep our entire team together for the entire year, because when the event's done, the real work starts, and it's when we roll up our sleeves, smell like armpits, and do.
Well, apart from the armpits, that was brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ravi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is the brilliant Blinky Bill. So a big round of applause, because you heard his music before. Now, Blinky is based in Nairobi. He was born Bill Salanga, but chose the name Blinky after one of his favourite TV characters, a little koala bear who was very feisty, very ecologically savvy, and was called Blinky. This was on an Australian TV show. So he's been Blinky ever since. He's a musician, a producer, and a DJ who's part of the Kenyan art and music collective Just a Band and a TED Fellow. He's also, tragically for him, an Arsenal supporter, but I'm trying to forgive him. And he describes his music as genreless, but when pressed, says that it's a fusion of hip-hop, Afrobeat, and jazz, which is great by me. So, Blinky, why did you choose music? Why did it draw you?
It's something that I've always been very keen on. Like, I remember as a kid when I used to be we have these things called matatus. It's like public buses in Nairobi, and they play music. And I remember being very, like, I'd notice a lot of small details in the music, like things that have you heard that detail? And someone would be like, no, I was just listening to the song as it is. And it's something that I just really enjoy making. And so in college, I started this band called Just a Band with a couple of friends of mine. And it ended up being a collective, an arts and music collective. So we'd make our own music, we'd make our own videos, we'd design our covers, we'd mix and master our own projects. And like there'd not been something like that in Nairobi. And now that I look back at it, it's an idea that has influenced so many new groups that are coming up because, like, yeah.
And can you talk about how your music and your approach to it has evolved in terms of the style of your music and your influences and inspirations, and also the techniques that you've used?
Like, I'm always trying to, like, what's the next idea that I want to work on? And it's so, like, this is my album that came out last year is my 5th project. And in all of those, you can find that there's a common groove, but there's no common, like, there's no genre that you can say this fits in. It's because I'm always chasing what is the next best thing that I can do.
And do you see your music as being rooted in or relating to a musical tradition of Kenya or of Africa, or both, or neither?
Definitely. I sample a lot of old Kenyan musicians, and now a lot of old African musicians because the reach is getting wider. But one of the things that I notice, nice ringtone. One of the things that I noticed is that with Kenya, we don't have a history of passing down music from generation to generation. And while it might be an opportunity for every generation to just figure out the new sound, I think it's very important to know where we are coming from, because it can help us innovate what the future is going to be. And I think I felt like that was something that was fundamentally missing. And so I've done a lot of remix of old Kenyan music, and it's gone down really well because people feel like a sense of connection to it.
And you were saying that one thing you're really enjoying at the moment is you're doing lots of collaborations with other musicians all over the world, and that this is something that recently has become available to many more African musicians than in the past. Do you think this is a long-term phenomenon or a fad that could fizzle out?
I don't think that it's a fad that will fizzle out, because there's a lot more understanding of African music. Like you can now see that a lot more big, or I'd say mainstream musicians are drawing on African musical influences and adding it to their sounds. And that is giving us more confidence to keep making more dope music, because I feel like the world needs it. And for the longest time, people were sleeping on like the rich treasure that is African music.
So, I mean, obviously a lot of bands, even very mainstream ones, have been influenced by African music for many years. Do you think there's a increasingly sophisticated understanding of it? I mean, I was very moved by the response to Hugh Masekela's death, for example. I mean, an incredible musician, and so many musicians I hadn't realised were influenced by him, talk very movingly about their inspiration. So what's different now between the sort of long-term respect among musos and fascination for African music?
I think now one of the things that's happening is that there's a lot more like kids in the hood making music with, like, it's not inexpensive software and inexpensive hardware, but making really quality music that's driving the streets. And also it's getting to a point where a lot more producers from around the world are noticing that there's something about it that is different, that they probably haven't had access to, because, I don't know, it felt like back in the 80s or 90s, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about what was happening on the continent, but now the internet has opened up the space, and yeah, like, I'm really enjoying it. Just last week I did something with a rapper from here and produced, he's called Gold Link, and did produced a song on his album. And it's like, that's crazy. Like, even for me, when it happened, I was like, wait, it's actually happening. And it's inspiring also for my friends who are back in Nairobi, because they now can see that our sound can travel everywhere.
And what are you hoping for in the future?
I want to make films.
And in the meantime, you're playing at the Montreal Jazz Festival next week,
Oh
aren't
yeah,
you?
I'm playing Montreal Jazz Festival next week and Summer Stage July 7th in New York. Central
Brilliant. But more imminently, you're about to play some more music now,
Oh yeah,
aren't you?
let me play some music for you guys.
So can you tell us what it's going to be?
I'm gonna wing it right now, but whatever it is that I'm gonna play is gonna be dope.
Okay, off you go.
And if it wasn't for the music, and if it wasn't for the music, 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 if it wasn't for the music, and if it wasn't for the music, and if it wasn't for the music, and if it wasn't for the music, music, music. You think I'll leave your side, baby? You know me better than that. Think I'll leave you down when you're down on your knees? I wouldn't do that. I'll tell you you're right when you want. If only you could say things to me. This one I do with the jabata. Me, I no get time, I did da ba da. Dada cover my face, calling me la ba da. Biggie man, we know they wear a ba da. Tell me, my nigga, what's it gon' G-Wagon, all depend. The girl them, ride the whip.
How the party I look, sir. How the party I look, sir. Look so good in my dress. See, you wanna look, sir. Sipping on elixir. Spin, spin me, yeah. DJ.
I've officially forgiven you for being a gooner. That's how good it was. Right. So our next speaker, I had the pleasure of hearing at What Design Can Do Mexico City a couple of weeks ago, and she was fantastic. So I was so looking forward to seeing her again and hearing her talk today. She's the star of many design Indabas, so much so she's now the creative director, the artist and fashion designer, Sally Khabi, as she tells me to say, Khan. Now, Sally was born in Dakar, in Senegal. She studied for an MBA at Modspe in the Fashion Business School in Paris. She then lived in the US and traveled throughout Africa before returning to Dakar to found her own fashion label in 2010. We will see some of her pieces, as well as this incredible jumpsuit a little later. But we're going to talk to Sally about her work, which is inspired by a myriad of influences: Senegalese symbolism, street culture, graffiti art, Afrofuturism, sci-fi, traditional African textiles. She counts many celebrities among her clients, including not one but two Knowles sisters, Beyoncé and Solange, and her work has been exhibited everywhere, from MoMA PS1 in New York to the Dakar Biennial, to the Vitra Design Museum in Basel. She experiments with lots of fields other than fashion. So she was part of IKEA's African product range, Overart, which was recently introduced at Design Indaba, and also experiments with virtual reality. She is famous for her extraordinary fashion shows, which she stages very elaborately in very unusual locations in Dakar, including Dakar's railway station. So we're going to take a look at a brief clip of one of them. So Sally, you work in so many different media. Why have you chosen fashion as the principal one?
Well, I think just like Blinky, it was something that has to do with childhood. I knew that I wanted to be a designer very early in my life, but I took another route that led me to law school, political science, etc., etc. And I think it's in 2008 that I decided that I had to make a choice and come back to my first love, which is fashion design.
And did you have a technical training in fashion design, or have you approached it as, say, Miuccia Prada does, more as a stylist?
I had zero training. I used to draw a lot. In 2008, when I started fashion, I had my student allowance that was given to us by the government of Senegal, so that's what I was keeping the whole year. And when I went back to Dakar at the summers, I was doing fashion shows, organizing shows with no knowledge whatsoever of the industry of fashion, but there was an urge to express something in fashion and in design.
And so why did you decide to base yourself in Dakar, given that fashion is such a sort of concentrated global business? There are these huge hubs in Paris, Milan, New York. Most international designers go there. And what have been the implications of that decision in terms of the pros and cons of running a fashion label from there?
I think the first thing is that very basically, Dakar was home for me. I grew up there, my family is there. It was intuitive for me to go back home after my studies. It has always been a plan for me, so I didn't see any other option. But what I felt in 2008 when I went to Dakar, started to investigate the creative scene, I felt an energy that was specific to the city. It was a time where the subculture was rising, where you had new people in fashion, in music, in many, many fields. So you can feel that there was a true emulation at that time. And I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to express myself from that, energy and nowhere else.
And how do you feel that your language as a fashion designer, your visual language and technical language, has evolved over the years?
Oh, it has evolved a lot. I think at the beginning it was very naive, simple, and I think it was an approach of fashion that was dictated by what I was seeing around me in Dakar. What the definition of femininity in Dakar was dictating what I was doing during the first 2 years, let's say, 2008, 2010. But then I realized that I had a voice, I had Dakar as a daily inspiration, public transportation, the visual identity of the city, and then my obsession for sci-fi, horror movies, etc. It all blended, let's say, in 2012. That's, I think, if I could pinpoint it, that would be the moment where I realized that it was all of those influences had a space in and a voice to express in garments.
And your work as a fashion designer is obviously immersed in your other experiments, your engagement with other media, and virtual reality is something you've experimented with. Could you tell us about that and how it relates to your fashion work?
How it relates? I think there's common source between fashion, virtual reality, the installation, art, etc. I think that the deep will behind all of this is to document my city. It is as well to dig deep into heritage, into immaterial patrimony, into the stories that all of us as kids in Dakar used to hear, and we don't see them visible enough in what is surrounding us. So I think there is a deep urge to document, tell the truth about ourselves, and do it in as many mediums as possible. So virtual reality was a mean for me, and a very precious one for me to dig deep into Senegalese mythology, do it in the background of Dakar, an area that it's my city, it's my playground. So yeah, that would be the main reasons.
Okay, so we're now going to see some of your work in fashion with Blinky back on the decks.
She football on the air, don't grab all the kitty. She telescope me, don't go on my clip. Don't you ever fall, don't blame it on it. Go power did I let you come to me with him. Oh, Nikin Latin, oh, Nima Latin, oh, Nikin Dojo me, oh, Loma Lapa, oh, Nikin Latin, oh, Nima Latin.
Now, Sally, could you talk us through each of these amazing pieces? And first of all, a big round of applause for the models, who all look amazing. So if you could talk us through the construction, the influences, what you were conveying in those garments.
Yes, the far right garment is inspired by what we call car rapides in Dakar. It's one of the main public transportation vehicles in Senegal. And everything that is graphic on these garments is inspired by that public transportation that is everywhere in the city that the governments want to take away. But I think it's a very precious visual element of Dakar. So this is typically what you see every day in Dakar. This dress is the jumpsuit in the middle is, let's say it's inspired by Mauritania, and I think it's in this collection. The collection name is 17 Rue Jules Ferry. It's one where I experiment the most with volumes, where I have let's say the freedom to get out of market mindset.
And so which years did you design these pieces in?
This was from 2000 both were from 2018. Yes, 2017.
And this one?
And this piece is from 2016, and it's I think it speaks about my visual obsession for shrimps and various insects and aquariums. So yeah, I think it summarizes my approach to fashion, which is, with a bit of childlike feeling, a sense of humor, and a will to tell where I'm designing from. That is very important for me.
And can you tell us about what you're wearing?
Yes, actually,
She's amazing.
This is part of the coming collection. I'm not allowed to wear it, but I'm wearing it still. And yes, I think this speaks of the opulence of Senegalese women this is actually something women pray with. It's a scarf. So I use it as a garment, and I think it's just how do we say it in English? Un clin d'œil,
Say it in French and I'll try.
a reference to the opulence of Senegalese women daily.
Cool.
So they would totally wear this at 10 a.m. in the morning, and it's totally normal for them.
Okay, off to Dakar and the next flight. Thank you so much, Sally, and
Well,
thank you to the models.
Thank you.
Okay, if you stay here. So if Ravi and Blinky could come to the stage. While Sally photographs all of you and the models leaving. Right, so we're just going to end by putting this in the context of the African scene. And Ravi, I want to start with you. And what do you believe were the catalysts, apart from Design Indaba, for this sort of explosion of creativity in Africa, and also for the rest of the world taking notice of it?
I think technology mostly. It's as Blinky even said, it's a great equalizer. Barriers to entry have dropped. I mean, Sally puts this out on her Instagram feed, and Beyonce picks it up. And I mean, that's an amazing, amazing leverage. I think we've got some of the most amazing ambassadors right now who are really hitting it globally. One of the most acclaimed DJs in the world right now is Black Coffee. You've got Trevor Noah hosting The Daily Show in New York. You've got people like Lupita. You've got a whole host of wonderful advocates of the best of African creativity who are performing at the top of the game in fora around the world. What else, Blinky?
I think you've said it all. No, I feel I'm just going to repeat exactly what you've said. So I think it's exactly that.
I mean, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking of the sort of, list of amazing African writers, architects, designers. It was endless. And probably because of my own ignorance 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to command such a list. It's impossible to think of contemporary literature without thinking of the Lagos literary scene, for example, and all those amazing writers. But do you feel that there's a genuinely enlightened and sophisticated understanding of contemporary African culture now? I mean, the great Nigerian curator, Okwe Enwezor, who very sadly died recently, railed and lambasted at the combination of ignorance, racism, prejudice, and intolerance that meant he felt that African culture was often willfully misunderstood in the West. And of course, he personally did so much to persuade people to look at it again and to set a really compelling intellectual and cultural agenda for it. So do you feel that, and Blinky's already answered this question so you're off the hook, in respect of music. I mean, Sally, do you feel that there's genuine interest and that people, learn about African culture properly, make the correct judgments, or is it still a bit superficial?
I think it's it's difficult to say. It might be a combination of both. I think there is more precautions that are taken when speaking about the continent. The first precaution that you can observe is that African is less and less speaking about as a country and seen for what it is, a huge space with billions of people and billions of vision of the world. So that's one important thing. The other thing I think is that what is interesting right now is that creatives such as Blinky, such as myself, have the opportunity to tell exactly who we are, where we come from, what is our vision of the world, without being weighed down by stereotypes or any vision of who we are before even arriving. So it's important for us to take back, to live a moment where that narrative is being taken over, and that I think that is when the conversation is the most interesting. When you ask genuinely who you are, where do you come from, what is your daily rituals, what is creativity, what is art to you. So I think that's, if there is a change for me, that's the change. Like the curiosity
Yeah.
is different and gives more space for people that are concerned to just give their voice.
And I mean, to your point about the vastness and complexity of Africa, I mean, is it even relevant to talk about African, Pan-African culture? I mean, this is a continent with over 2,000 languages, an extraordinarily rich and remarkable cultural history that has historically been treated beyond shabbily. So should we even be using this term, or should we be speaking much more precisely about individual countries, individual communities within those countries?
We should be precise. I mean, I don't feel like if you're a designer from South Korea, you have a responsibility to be representing Asia. And I don't think Blinky should feel the responsibility of representing the entire continent. I mean, it's 1.2 billion people, 54 countries. It takes 9 hours to fly from Cape Town to the northern tip of Africa. It's vast swathes of lands, and so I think it's an onerous burden for this particular generation. And I love how super specific, for example, Sally is about a particular place, about Dakar. And I think what it all speaks to right now is a newfound sense of confidence, that they're not trying to out Paris. They're just trying to tell their best possible stories of themselves, their history. Yeah.
So, Blinky.
I think that's one of the things that for the longest time was and has been that we have not been in charge of telling our stories. So if I came to America and told an American story, it would be offensive. Like if I told it from, like I know exactly what it happened. But for the longest time with African stories, and I use Africa in terms of, in the broad sense of the world, because the more time goes, the more people will learn to be a bit more specific. But it's like a lot of news reports, you don't hear it from our sources. You hear it from CNN, so it's like we're not telling you the story. But it's changing right now because we're here talking about our stories, talking about our music, talking about our culture, talking about my ideas. So it's like there's a bit more representation, and I think with time it's going to even get more detailed.
You know, we talked about the technology, and one of the kind of long-tail phenomena that's starting to happen, which is so exciting, is that we're not restricted to our own nation's broadcasting networks and so on. All of a sudden, the phenomenon of Netflix, who are commissioning comedy specials out of African cities for the world, or new drama series directed by African directors with an entirely African cast. And so this has been fantastically liberating with the creative class, because their commissions are coming from not just within the continent, not just within their countries, but from all around the world.
I mean, this is, of course, not only particular to Africa or the Africas. It's, Nordic noir drama, which is now a sort of global phenomenon. No one would have thought the sort of, boring Brits would have watched a Danish soap opera. We love them, so everybody goes around in bad woolly sweaters and so on. But I mean, it's wonderful that Africa has benefited from this too. So what do you think the future holds, and what do you think are the big challenges now for creativity and the cultural scene in Africa in terms of its relationship with the rest of the world, and what are the big opportunities?
So I think what we don't want to do is to soft soap it and try to say, well, we have a burgeoning creative sector, but I don't think we've got quite critical mass yet. We still have some major issues. I think we don't have the educational institutions yet. I mean, we've got this wonderful story of a colleague of ours, Christian Benimana, who taught himself Mandarin so he could go and study architecture at a school in China because there's no architectural school in Rwanda. So I think there's a lot more to be done in terms of the educational infrastructure to support these. And what we're just referring to here is exceptionalism. And we'll be a lot more happier if there's a larger cohort of African creatives. And then secondly, I think there needs to be a better policy framework for the support of the creative industries. I think it goes for most parts of the world. Probably the most progressive spaces are like in Scandinavia, but I operate in the country where we're the de facto design council. There is no national design council. So there are these policy vacuums that need to be taken care of. And I think the third issue is one of funding. And we found a way with regards leveraging a platform like Design Indaba, where we've discovered our ecological niche is a corporate boardroom, and we'll be able to translate the story into kind of business speak. And so almost the entire platform is not funded by government, but funded by the private sector. But there aren't enough kind of accelerators or incubators to really support the creative industries back home. So policy, funding, and education.
Okay, Sally, do you have anything to add for that in terms of the challenges that you and your peers face and also the big opportunities for the future?
Oh, I think Ravi says it all. I mean, currently and the example that I can give for the fashion industry is the matter of textiles. The fact that most of the garments that I make are from important textiles, even if it's made in Senegal, you have all of those textiles that are, half of the, no, not half, way more of what we produce is imported. And I think it's because in the 90s we lost cotton industry, textile industry. What could feed fashion designers such as myself today doesn't exist anymore. So I think policy is fundamental, and governmental vision for its creative scene as well is fundamental.
And Blinky, you're obviously operating in a very different environment where government intervention, even if it's benevolent, could only be negative. I mean, what for you are the immediate challenges and the big things that make you very hopeful for the future?
I'll start with the things that make me hopeful. I feel like there's a lot more people who can see hope and a future in making art. And there's a lot more younger, up-and-coming musicians. Like the scene, for example, in Nairobi is growing by the day. And it makes me happy because when I was starting out, we were like the outliers. Now it's like there's a whole bunch of people who are coming in as well. And that makes me happy. The issue is that government policy doesn't favor us, and they probably don't see the use of what it is that we do. So it's almost like we're tasked with the job of making the art and also educating a whole system on how this is beneficial to us and to them for a healthy environment.
Aha. Well, a healthy environment is a brilliant note to end on. So I would like to say a huge thank you to Blinky, to Ravi, and to Sally.